Welcome to our second episode of Table Talk. I'm here with John. John's going to be talking us through the next chapter of Mark that
with
we got up to on Sunday. What we've been doing, and we're going to continue to keep doing, is just asking: is there anything from the previous bit of the passage that you just want to pick up on, or point out, or something interesting that'd be worth mentioning before we move on to Mark chapter 2?
Yeah. I guess there's quite a lot from the previous passage that carries on in terms of what Jesus is doing, but it was brilliant, wasn't it, on Sunday to think about how Jesus meets people's gaze, and he's present on a personal level, which we have come to not expect from people who are so busy or so popular. It was just wonderful to see the way that he dignifies the leprous man by reaching out and touching him.
So there's 5 sections we're going to be looking at.
Yeah.
So the first one, chapter 2, verses, for people following, 1 to 12. So a couple of things that I noticed straight away, which I think is quite interesting. Carrying on from chapter 1, we've got these massive numbers of people. Again, like we saw last week, people crowding from everywhere, loads of people coming to see him, and there's no room. There's such large numbers, there's no room left, not even outside the door. And once again, his priority with all these people is he saw them and he preached the word to them. That's what he wants to do. He's preaching the word, and yet we've got these. They're looking for something else, aren't they? They're looking for healing. They're looking for sort of all external stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can imagine, can't you, that the man's friends have heard about the healing that he's done, and that's why that they are so desperate coming to him, that they're carrying their friend who's paralyzed on a mat, and then they're so desperate that even though there's a crowd, they go up on the roof, would have been a flat roof in those days, and dig through it. I wonder what the owner of the home thought of that. But then lower him down. They've obviously heard about what Jesus has been doing in other places, and they're so excited that he's back in Capernaum, that they're bringing their friend.
It's crazy there, isn't it? Because we don't see what the man himself wants. This is like. Yeah. The friends are driving this, aren't they? That's quite unusual to have these 4 guys who bring in their, we assume it's a friend or a relative or something, to Jesus to be healed. I don't know whether somebody could probably tell us actually, whether there's another case of the person themselves not actually coming for healing, but actually just sort of being brought. We never get to see what they're interested in.
Yeah. And Jesus is responding in verse 5. It says he's responding to their faith, rather than his faith, specifically the paralyzed man. So he's seeing the faith of the group in coming to him. I guess then Jesus does he does that locking of eyes, doesn't he? When he says, "Son, your sins are forgiven," he's speaking straight to the paralyzed man.
That's a wonderful phrase, that, isn't it? Son. Yeah. We're going to look at the bleeding woman in a few chapters' time. He says, "Daughter." It's like this wonderful sort of compassionate language towards these people. Yeah. Again, like really caring about them as the individual.
Yeah.
And it was, you pointed out last time. I say last time, so everybody realizes this is not the first time we've done this. This is the second time. The second time we've tried to do this podcast. And you pointed out that this was really surprising, because there's been so many healings so far in Mark. Every time someone's come, Jesus has healed them. He's healed them. And he doesn't do it. It's surprising, isn't it?
Yeah. And he sort of later gives the game away when we get to verse 10, and he says, "I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." So he's seen something in the crowd and the teachers of the law who are present in that situation, that he is wanting to teach into and speak into. So it's not that all that personal compassion with the man is a front, but Jesus is doing 2 things.
So interestingly, we are now coming across some of the religious elite, some of the teachers of the law, who know their Bibles inside out. They will know that there's sort of like a promised Messiah coming. And they're now starting to critique this Messiah, this Jesus figure that's appeared. Because what's interesting is if you sort of read Mark 1, this Jesus just goes around doing incredible things. It's amazing. Like, it's so exciting to see sort of the healing he does and the teaching with authority and how he helps people. And you should be surprised to get to chapter 2 and go, so why are people opposing him? Well, the reason they're opposing him is because he's not what they're expecting to be like. And these guys are sort of like the Bible teachers, and they're expecting something. And so this is like the first rejection, is opposition of Jesus. And they're calling him a blasphemer. They're saying that he's saying he's God, and no one should be allowed to say that. That's the first one. So we're going to see 5, like we said, there's 5 sections, and they're all oppositions. They're all the teachers of the law accusing Jesus of something.
Yeah, it's just really, really interesting that it's a very, very similar calling, isn't it? That he gives to Levi, to the fishermen. Yeah. And it's even noted that he's out beside the lake. So it's like the same setting, and he picks out this tax collector out of the setting and says, "Follow me," and then goes to his house and has dinner with him. He's set on Levi, and then goes and eating together would be an intimate thing, wouldn't it? So sharing a meal, you're accepting somebody, you're sort of holding out a branch to them, inviting them in, you're at peace with one another. I think that's the big thing, isn't it? If you're having a meal with someone, then you're at peace with them. And part of the problem here is he is at peace with sinners. Yeah. Which is something that shouldn't happen if you're a religious person. Yeah. And he's claiming to be God even, and he's saying he's at peace with sinners, which just is outrageous, an outrageous claim. Yeah. You can imagine that in chapter 1, it says that the people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. So even in that initial setting, there is a bit of a comparison going on between the teachers of the law and Jesus in terms of being a teacher. And these Pharisees and teachers of the law are picking up on that and sort of they're really, really uncomfortable with the difference in Jesus's behaviour to theirs, because they would really, really not be comfortable with eating with these people. They would have sort of disassociated themselves in order to sort of associate how, in order to stress how righteous they are. That would come from putting distance between themselves and people who have publicly sinned. Whereas Jesus, in the same way that he reaches out and touches the leprous man who's cast out from society, here he's going out and eating and accepting these tax collectors and sinners who would have been cut off from the religious community.
So the first two, fairly simple stories that are quite easy to understand. This third one, though, feels like there's a lot here which takes a little bit of thinking through.
It's a complicated analogy, isn't it, about sort of the behaviour of leather, really. But I guess what he's saying is that he is doing something new, and rather than the Pharisees trying to take what Jesus is doing as a patch or a little update on part of their behaviour. Yes. So sort of in a way that says,
little upgrade.
Yeah, you've had you've had 10 things on your list of what to do for a good person. Here's an extra 2 just to finish you off. Yeah. Actually, what Jesus is saying is this is something new. Yeah. And there will be a time where it sort of reaches maturity, but rather than trying to add this on, rather than trying to patch this onto your existing understanding of good works, this is like fundamentally new and game changing.
And that's what you see in the first two, is they're looking at it going, this is different. This isn't how we're expecting someone to act. This is game changing. He is spending time with tax collectors and sinners. He's touching lepers. He's, calling the strangest people. He's forgiven sins. This isn't something that they're just sort of tacking on to the end of their religion already. This is changing everything.
Yeah. Like you can see that the teachers of the law, if they're trying to reconcile Jesus's behavior with their behavior of a really long to-do list of how to be a good person, that they're not going to get there. They're going to miss the point. Because the point is about faith and forgiveness, and about restoration. When Jesus calls himself a doctor for those who are ill, not those who are healthy, and having come for sinners.
And we are, I think, to-do list people. I think we function on to-do lists, don't we?
It's so easy, isn't it, just to fall into ticking the box of being good enough, being a good enough person, and it's a real challenge, isn't it, as Christians to live by faith, rather than just sort of doing enough to think of ourselves as a good person. Like so often. We sort of try and sort ourselves out to a certain extent before we then
we do
ask for grace or sort of come to God. So it's like I have to be good enough to a certain level, and then I can confess my sins.
Exactly. So I've done
like
something wrong, I've sinned, but I'm not going to pray because I feel bad about it. I'm going to wait till I feel slightly better, and then I can pray. And I guess in some ways I sympathise with the Pharisees, because being told that all the box ticking you're doing is pointless, that feels quite bad. You just feel like, well, I feel like I should deserve something from this. I feel like because I've been a good person, I deserve something. And yet, at the same time, knowing you don't need to is just there's so much relief involved in that.
Yeah.
Knowing that actually I could never have got there, but now because Jesus, we're starting again, and that's incredibly exciting, and we'll see what that looks like as we go through the book. So these are the two about to look at Sabbath related, aren't they?
Yes, both this one and the one that we'll come to in a little while. They happen on the Sabbath, and it's interesting. Like the Pharisees almost step up in their confidence. So in the first one, they were just thinking, and Jesus knew what they were thinking. In the second one, they ask his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Then in the third one, the Pharisees are fasting, and it's not actually them who come to Jesus with the objection. But then here, it's almost like they're treating the Sabbath as their territory. Yeah, like they're the Sabbath police, who are the ones who tell people whether they're getting it right or wrong on the Sabbath, because that's a religious occasion.
And just explain what does that mean? That's a religious occasion. What is the Sabbath to these people?
Yeah, so the Sabbath, I guess, is a day of rest, and so there's there are a load of rules in the Old Testament that were given to Israel surrounding the Sabbath, this day of rest. So actually, when they say why are they doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath, what they've got an issue with, it seems to be that their issue is that the disciples picking ears of corn is close enough to reaping, which is categorized as a type of work. So they're saying, well, look, your disciples are doing some work on the Sabbath, when they're walking through.
They're clutching straws, aren't they?
Literally, very good.
It's ridiculous that they're accusing them of this, and it's so close, just because it's so close to looking like work. But for them, it's a big deal. They're like we just said, they're very works related, aren't they? Yeah,
and I'm guessing that they're not. This is something that they'd be consistent on. That they would say that anyone who's picking ears of corn is doing work, and so shouldn't be doing it on the Sabbath. I'm guessing this has sort of been passed down to them as tradition of how they go about policing and making sure that people are doing the day of rest properly.
So Jesus is a lawbreaker. That's what they're saying. He's here and he's breaking the law, their law.
Yeah.
What are they missing the point on here?
Oh man. So I mean, Jesus sort of points to David and says, "Look, you make an exception for David, don't you?" In the narrative from the Old Testament where he enters the house of God. I mean, Jesus sort of points to David and says, "Look, you make an exception for David, don't you?" In the narrative from the Old Testament where he enters the house of God and eats the consecrated bread. In that there, David is doing what's unlawful, but obviously David is held in such a high place of esteem. But then he speaks on his own authority, and I really sympathise for the Pharisees, because it's like when he says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Like, he is speaking full on with heavenly authority there. It's not that they've slightly failed to see something obvious in the Old Testament. He's saying, okay, let me take this concept of Sabbath, which you see in Genesis and through the Old Testament, and let me take your scriptures and turn them upside down and say, this is how you should read them. He's taking Genesis 1 where God rests, and he's saying, this is what was happening in those 7 days of creation. And you just think, no wonder it's tough for them. No wonder if someone came along and told you you've been reading your Bible wrong, this is exactly how you should read it, you'd be cynical. You'd be defensive on the back foot.
Yeah, I always wonder, what would I be like if I was in the Book of Mark? Like, if I was there and I met Jesus, I think I'd be more like a Pharisee than I would some of the other people in the narrative.
Yeah. And when he references the Son of Man, it says, so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Son of Man is a term which is sort of a callback to an Old Testament prophecy where one who is described as like a Son of Man is given heavenly authority. So he is sort of making that callback that he is one like a Son of Man, the subject of that prophecy. And he is speaking here on heavenly authority, just like actually he was with the forgiving sins in the first passage, when he says, I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins.
And ultimately, you were talking about Sabbath being related to rest, so God resting, and actually Adam and Eve were told to work and resting God. And what we see here actually is Jesus suggesting that the Sabbath is something good, something to be enjoyed, and it's to do with rest. And actually, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is the one ultimately we're going to rest in. Jesus is the one who ultimately we're going to come to. And Jesus says to me, you'll come who are weary and you'll find rest. And actually, there's this idea that Sabbath rest is something that should be found in him. And actually, again, we're missing the point if we're just making it about rules and I can't do this and I can't do that.
Yeah.
Should we just let's move on to the last one. So we've had Jesus as a lawbreaker there. This is the beginning of chapter 3. So chapter 3, verse 1 to 6. So we've had this build up in opposition. Like you said, they're becoming more and more confident. Remained unspoken, spoken to the disciples, spoken to Jesus, getting louder and louder. The silence here is quite interesting, isn't it? It's here they remain silent, and yet the opposition is still built to the point where now they're going to plot how to kill him.
Yeah,
that's the point that we've reached to. So after all these things that they've accused him of being, lawbreaker, here we see about doing evil, blasphemer, they've decided they want to get rid of him.
Yeah, we've sort of come such a long way, but you can hear, can't you, in the way that Jesus is speaking, he is speaking to them with authority, and they hate it.
Yeah.
That the authority that he's speaking with, he has directly associated it with God, with speaking with heavenly authority. He's claimed to be able to forgive sins. He has he's spoken about why he's come with such clarity and such contrast to how their practice. He's said, look, I'm doing something different. I'm not doing the same thing as the Pharisees and John's disciples. He's said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And all of this, he's setting up his ministry as something that gives life, something that brings life. And here in this final story, again, he's looking into their hearts, isn't he? He can see what they're thinking as they're watching him.
Yeah, and they watched him closely. And then Jesus goes, "You don't need to watch me closely. Look, stand up in front of everybody. Yeah. I'll show you what you want to see." Yeah. And he uses it as a teaching point, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. So the reason they're accusing him, and that they're watching to see whether he's going to do this, is that healing is something that's traditionally outlawed on the Sabbath unless it's a life or death situation. So that's the tradition that was set up. It's not Old Testament law, and Jesus speaks straight into that, doesn't he? Which is lawful to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill. And I guess he's hinting that this is a life or death situation. What he speaks into when he is healing people is not just physical healing, but his work is saving life, and that as he is doing good, he is saving life, and obviously that's going to get unpacked a lot more as we get towards the cross.
But you can see why he's deeply distressed at their hearts, because he's trying to save lives, and they're trying to kill his. Like, they're trying to destroy him. It's a complete contrast, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so humbling as well that the way they're described is just stubborn-hearted, and they're stubborn-hearted because they think they know how to be a good person, and Jesus wants to take that out of their hands and say, let me define it for you, let me speak into it, and they're not willing to. And it's so easy for us to do that. It's so easy for us to make church and Christian things a routine that we just go about because that's our rhythm, that's what we do.
And we're stubborn.
Yeah,
and stubborn-hearted.
Yeah, it's scary how little that accusation of being stubborn-hearted seems to be. How reasonable an accusation that would be, to be levelled at me. It's a present danger.
So as we wrap up, then, what would it look like for us to do this differently? Jesus has come to do things differently, rather than us to continue in that routine. What would it look like for us to do things differently?
The first thing has got to be to pray, because the stumbling block that good works can be to coming to Jesus, and the stumbling block that having a body of good works that you fall short of can be, in that, well, I'm not good enough to go to God. Jesus is wanting to just clear that away, to take that away, and to give us freedom in how we come to Him, and it's a really difficult thing to confess, and I guess that comes from how deep-rooted pride can be in our hearts. But I think it absolutely starts with confession. Coming to God and saying, look, I so quickly make idols of looking good, of doing the right things, of what other people think of me and how they see me, when actually Jesus is the source of life. And so first and foremost, we've just got to come to him and lay down our pride and say, you're the one who gives life. You're the only source of our righteousness and goodness. Yeah.